This is my copyright presentation, part 2, using the Assure lesson plan. Analyze learners. General characteristics of students are that they will be digital natives. Ninth grade students, almost all students have access to technology and devices at home. Entry competencies, almost 50% of students have no prior knowledge of copyright. Students who have heard the term have never had a formal lesson. Learning differences and needs, most students prefer hands-on learning and group projects. As digital natives, most students are visual learners. State standards. So this is the Texas Library Standards Dimension 2. Learners and educators practice the ethical and legal use of information, including transformative fair use, intellectual freedom, information access, privacy, proprietary rights, and validation of information as approval in local policy, EFA, federal law, First Amendment, and best library practice in the Library Bill of Rights. So this is just to give you an understanding of the Texas Library Standards as far as how the copyright assignment pertains to these library standards. Learning objectives. So students will be able to define copyright by the end of this lesson, to understand copyright basics, to understand the importance of copyright and the effects of misuse, proficiency in terms involving copyright, so copyright infringement, derivative works, fair use, plagiarism, and public domain. Select strategies and resources. So instructional strategies will include a lecture-style presentation that will be done through PowerPoint. It'll give the library an opportunity for the librarian to present the new terms to students with the use of visual aids and examples. And it also gives the students the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Following the presentation, there will be a small group activity. I would separate the students into groups for a short activity involving different copyright scenarios. The resources they will use will include an activity sheet provided by myself as the librarian, a laptop or device for each group, scrap paper, highlighter, and writing utensils. Utilize resources. To preview resources, I would look over my PowerPoint just to make sure that the PowerPoint itself is free of errors and functioning, and make sure that my activity sheets are ready and separated for each group. That goes along with just preparing the resources, so each table for the group of students will already be separated, and all their materials will lie on each table ready for them to take part in that activity. To prepare the environment, I'll make sure all laptops and devices are functioning, and I will put the lecture that I will be doing through PowerPoint on each individual device so they can kind of view it as we move along. To prepare the learners, I'll introduce the lecture topic as well as going over the slide in the PowerPoint that includes the learning objectives. In the group activity, I would explain the activity sheet, and each student, like I said, will be given a scenario of how an individual either properly followed copyright or violated a copyright. Students must apply what they have learned using terms from the lecture to explain the scenario. This will be explained prior to the activity. Provide the learning experience. So the learning experience will occur in the library with myself, their teacher for their project who wanted them to learn more about copyright will also be present, and they'll have access to the internet. Require learner participation. So there will be that small group activity with 2 to 3 students per group. They'll read through their scenario. Each scenario will be different, and the students will decide together if a copyright infringement has occurred. And then after the activity, the students will present their findings. The activity is meant to be a fun activity. I would have scenarios such as that include maybe Shakespeare's work, so that hopefully students might recognize that the copyright is actually out of date, it expired, and that's when they'd have to recognize like what we learned and refer it back to the lesson, which is that the copyright expires 70 years after the death of the author, writer, creator. Evaluate and revise. So there will be a rubric provided, or that a rubric that I, as the librarian and their instructor, their teacher, will use in order to determine if they were successful and are able to properly comprehend the copyright lecture and activity. And then once we review how the students have done on their copyright uh, group activity, revisions will be made accordingly to see if if that was successful for the students.